Good.
Test.
One. Assalamu alaikum.
Okay. Hello? Yes.
We're getting.
Should we? Okay.
We've even got.
You have the flicker. Okay. So, good afternoon. So, we are going to start. So, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed aviation enthusiasts, industry leaders, so welcome to this panel in which we are going to go through the frontiers of aviation. It is a pleasure to have you all. Today, we will discuss and explore what are the challenges that the industry is facing towards this path, what is the innovations, and also what are the sustainable pathways to reach and to achieve these targets that we are all wanting to look at. Let me introduce the panelist, Mr. Stephen McCullough, Chief Engineer of Bombardier, responsible for engineering and product development of the aircraft manufacturer. Tom O'Leary, co-founder and CEO of JetZero, a company that is working with US Navy, NASA, and FAA to develop a blended wing aircraft. Engineer Omar, Chief Commercial Officer of NAMI, a National Innovation Industrial Company, and Stephen Sattel, Chief Commercial of MD Helicopters, an organization that has in service around 1,500 aircrafts. So it is a pleasure to host you and to have you here in this panel. So let's start with a question. Stephen, so how do you envision the future of flight?
That's a pretty interesting question. I would start off by, first of all, sort of saying it's really nice to be here at the Future Aviation Forum here in the Kingdom. You know, in terms of the future of flight at Bombardier within our business aircraft, we really see our products as enabling leaders that shape the world, very much in line with what was discussed this morning about seeing aviation as a way to support growth and well-being. We really see a lot of focus now on our commitment in business aviation to net carbon neutrality in 2050, which is going to drive a lot of innovation in the coming years. But, you know, in terms of how we see it, we see a very bright future. You know, our company is founded on thought leadership and innovation. Over the last 30 years, we've developed 30 aircraft products. Each product that we develop, we go back through a lessons learned cycle and further enhance our tools. But you know, it's not just about the products. Obviously, what keeps us all in business is customers. And we're very happy, particularly in the last number of years, of the growth that we've seen on our aftermarket support. And also on the defence side, we see a lot of activity. We're really pleased with the use of our Challenger 650 and our global products in terms of many nations' defence products. But the one thing that we see is that it's not going to stand still. You know, aviation moves, innovation moves. You know, we look at the industry-leading Global 7500. We just certified that in 2018, put it in service. You know, even though we have 150 of them in service with around 100,000 hours, you know, it's really important to keep moving and keep developing products. And when we look at items like the Global 8000, which will be the longest range business jet, lowest cabin altitude, you know, we really see that need to keep driving and keep innovating. One of the interesting things on something with an 8,000 nautical mile range is if you draw a dot in Riyadh and look at, you know, planet Earth, it's pretty clear why it's called a global. You can essentially go anywhere. But one of the things that we also see is that the next generation needs support in terms of developing people, process, and tools. And so in terms of the environmental part of it all, if we take a look at I'll just flick to the next slide. You know, one of the things that we've been working hard at Bombardier is we are very conscious of our responsibility to planet Earth, to sustainability. We do that in many ways. One of the things is that we're the first business jet company to do a product declaration statement, which really goes from the start of energy producing the aircraft through in service all the way through to decommissioning an aircraft and put down all the data. Why is that important? It's important that if you're going to measure how are you getting better as time goes by, it needs to start off with a good databases. This gives us a good databases. Obviously, our operations, we're operating on SAF through a book and claim. But one of the things that we really are keen here at is we're developing a blended wing technology, and it's not just about this as a potential product. It's also that we're looking at new tools, new ways of doing development. And one example will be that we've been working on these configurations since around 2008, conventional wind tunnel work, etc. We see this as probably offering around a 50% improvement in terms of emissions than our existing aircraft. About 20% of that is from aerodynamics. And what we've tried to do is give the team a very different way to approach this than we would do in the past. We built scale models. Our first scale model had around 8 foot of wingspan. We're now flying an aircraft that is 18 foot of wingspan. And what that lets us do is it lets us develop a product. It's almost like a flying laboratory, but it gives us lots of technology to develop the people and tools. So a bright future, a lot going on. And really, we see technology as an enablement to actually develop faster.
Thank you, Stephen. So fantastic. So, Tom, what are your thoughts? So, how Jet Zero envision the future? What are the key innovations and use cases that you see that are coming from your end?
Right. So at Jet Zero, we're designing a new aircraft for a variety of spaces, both for commercial, freight, and military, with a blended wing body design. And so really, we look at the future of flight as needing to be better in virtually every way that you can think of. Right? We've come a long way in the industry. We've been able to scale globally and create an incredibly safe platform. It's the safest form of travel. It's safer than walking down the street in reality. That's amazing, just to say that, just think about it. And so what's next? We need aircraft here. You can see a vision of the future, aircraft that are dramatically more efficient. And as the name implies, we need to be on a path towards zero emission, but that's a long way off from our perspective. Whether it comes from hydrogen combustion, hydrogen fuel cell, battery electric, these are all very expensive technologies that are going to take decades to develop. So Jet Zero's vision of the future is very simple. Let's get there one step at a time. Let's begin with the first principles solution. Let's begin with lift, weight, drag, and thrust. Any pilot knows these are the 4 forces of flight. You can't even begin to test yourself out as a pilot in an aircraft unless you understand lift, weight, drag, and thrust. And so as an industry, we've been solving problems by dint of propulsion for so many years, for decades really. So the concept with Jet Zero is very simple. Our best path to the future is to start by addressing a new airframe that delivers 50% lower fuel burn and emissions, right? We can do this with today's equipment, today's engines, today's avionics, today's systems. Really, everything on the aircraft is commercial, off the shelf, certified already. That's how we're going to accelerate our path into service, is to use the equipment that's already being produced by our supply chain. And in so doing, we're not only going to bring a solution that the airlines so desperately want, which is a mid-market aircraft that can seat 250 passengers with a dramatic fuel reduction, but we're going to do another thing, which is we're going to help the supply base be even healthier, because we're going to take the things that they've already engineered, the things that they've already developed and certified as equipment, and put them on this aircraft of the future. And that gives us a platform. It gives us a more efficient platform from which to deploy things like battery electric or hydrogen propulsion. So this really, we believe, is the best first step forward for the future of aviation. And as I mentioned, one last thing, everything has to get better. So we look at this shape and we say, how can this shape help us improve everything about our operation for jetliners? So it could be that we're talking about passenger comfort, about the ability to board an aircraft more quickly, to egress an aircraft more quickly in case of emergency, to be able to provide a better experience for the pilots and for the crew. And we think of that as like the shape enables us to make everything in the future better. And that's really the future of aviation that I think we can all look forward to.
Thank you, Tom. Engineer Omar, so from the NAMI standpoint, so what is envisioned for the future of flight?
Thank you, Miguel. Just to give you an introduction about NAMI, we are a national additive manufacturing company. This is built by two strategic partnerships between Dusur, which is PIF, Aramco, and SABIC, owned, and a strategic partner called 3D System, publicly traded. They invented the technology back in 1983, and the company then was launched in 86, where currently is publicly traded in New York Stock Exchange. So they invented 3D printing, and we leverage it quite intensively here in NAMI to digitize spare parts and to have these parts available to be printed on demand based on the customer request. And as Tom mentioned, currently we are in an age where we wanted to lower fuel consumption to increase our efficiency. And the way we come about it is work with the OEM to come up with a solution of reducing parts sizes and weight, which enhances the flight efficiency. And working with our technical partner, we started by training our engineer. We hired application operation technicians and to be trained in the US, Belgium, and Germany. And that's how we kicked off the company back in November 2022. At that time, the company was launched, and we started operational by March 2023. We added to our arsenal both the metal and the polymer, which we see it strategic for the Kingdom value chain, where we leverage material from SABIC. And we try always to increase our efficiency and performance by working very closely with the OEMs from all over the globe.
Thank you, Omar. Very interesting. We have the perspective of fixed wind point of view, also manufacturing, and now with Stephen, also from the Rotary wing. What is your view on how MD Helicopters envision the future?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, thanks again for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. This is a magnificent venue. Yeah, it's interesting to be the last guy with the same question, because a lot of the things are very similar in terms of the physical components of upgrading and becoming better. Our company is, the helicopter industry sort of been caught in this technology paradigm for quite a while. Not really anything new in the helicopter industry for a long time. I think the most innovative thing is probably the Bell 525. Not my competitor, because it's in a different category, so I don't mind giving them a shout out. But that's a pretty amazing helicopter, and it's amazing not just because of the physical characteristics, but what this leads to what MD is trying to do, and that's to integrate thoughtful aerodynamics and thoughtful interaction with the pilots and with the consumers and with the customers. So we want the aircraft to anticipate and facilitate when there are problems, or just for when customers are in the back. We want the experience to be intuitive. We don't want it to be obtrusive. In our industry, noise and vibration are the things that drive customers crazy, but it also, as anybody who's in the industry knows, affects the maintenance, because the more vibration you have, the shorter the service life is going to be on those component parts. The shorter the service life to some degree of the pilot, because we do have those factors, those environmental factors of how it affects. So we need to look at, and what we're trying to do at MD right now with our next generation aircraft is we want to look at ways to make the aircraft safer. We want to look at ways to make the aircraft lighter and stronger, make the engines more efficient. I agree with my colleague about some of these innovative concepts are a long way off. But that doesn't mean we can't try to bridge the gap. And when I say bridge the gap, I mean like there's no way if you created a battery, if you created a helicopter with a battery big enough to make it useful, you'd get about 2 minutes of flight, or you couldn't carry anyone. It wouldn't be useful. But what we can do is maybe look at taking a bite of the apple. Like, for example, why don't we use the battery just to take off and land? So we use the battery, for one reason, it'll be a lot quieter, and we know that the environmental factors and noise abatement are pretty significant issues as well. So what if we use the battery just to give us about 5 minutes take off inside the urban area, inside the municipalities? Then you can crank the engine or go to the fossil fuel engine after that. Then when you're on your final approach, now you go back to your battery again, you come in there and land. So what we're suggesting is just taking a bite of that apple. Instead of trying to boil the ocean, I heard that term today, instead of trying to boil the whole ocean, we really think that there are efficiencies to be gained by just taking smaller components and doing it this way. We're also looking at things like our production facilities and on-demand workforce. You know, why not have a bunch of workers that you can call in on demand? You can increase and decrease your production facility. Right now, it's extremely complicated to do that, but there may be ways, and we're looking at ways to potentially do that. And then, of course, everyone is looking at the sort of ubiquitous autonomous flight scenarios. And our particular company's specialty is the light single aircraft. So that's our sweet spot. So,
thank you, Stephen. So, and moving to the next question. So, Stephen, when do you see that all of this innovation will be commercialized at scale? So, what is, let's say, the time horizon? As Stephen was commenting also, so how long do we need to wait to see these marvelous aircrafts flying?
Obviously, I think the first part of the question, the first part of that is that we will see progressive elements of them, certainly over the next decade. I think that the good alignment on the industry, you know, a bit like we don't compete on safety, you can see that the industry has aligned very well on what we're going to do in terms of the environment, with a very aggressive goal, aggressive achievable goal to be net carbon neutral by 2050. So clearly that time frame is a time frame where a lot of innovation, and we will see things different. I think we'll start seeing stuff coming out quite different towards the end of this decade, and certainly in the 2030s. One of the things, you know, one of the other factors on that is that obviously a lot of technology, computational power, generative AI, there's also a lot of other items that are enablement to go and to drive future products. But there's also, and for good reason, a regulatory framework that we all work with. So a lot of interesting stuff coming up in terms of this decade. You'll also see that I think clearly, you know, this industry is a village. It's a large village in terms of key suppliers. I think we're all one sort of mode of separation away from each other. But you'll also see that some of the technology kind of brings in new players and different players, even some of the university collaboration. So I think a lot of work at the end will be done this decade to really set us in a good state for the next 2 decades to 2050.
Thank you. So we still need to wait a couple of decades. So Tom, from your viewpoint and your thoughts, what are the main challenges, barriers that the industry is facing or will face to reach that target?
Well, I think really from an aviation perspective, everyone knows that certification is the biggest challenge, financial challenge, timeline challenge, right? Time is money, and it takes a long time to certify now. I would point everyone's attention to something quite significant I think's gone under the radar, is that in the past year or so, we just had an FAA Reauthorization Act come through in the United States. The FAA now has a second mandate. For their entire existence, they've had one and only one mandate, and that's safety. And now they have two. They have safety and sustainability. So a lot of times people say, you know, why would you be so audacious as to say that you're going to go out and build a jet into a market where there are only two players, massive global companies? How can you possibly? Now, from my perspective, it's a little bit different because I used to work at Tesla, and I opened the first two stores. I was the first sales and marketing hire at Tesla. So I'm kind of used to people saying, oh, you'll never be able to do that. That's impossible. And when you look at certification, it's actually a lot more challenging than it is, almost laughably so, right? You know, I see a lot of smiles, like, of course, we're talking about aviation. This isn't the same thing as cars. It's a whole different thing. But just consider that idea that the FAA has to now think about sustainability too. And that means simply that they need to marshal resources towards a certification effort for those companies that are bringing real solutions when it comes to sustainability. We've already seen this. We've met with the FAA. So clearly the biggest challenge is certification. There are headwinds with regard to certification, but again, as any pilot knows, you always take off into the headwind, right? And that's really how we look at this. We don't look at that and say, oh, there's headwinds, we have to turn away. We say, oh, that's when to take off. And so we see comes to certification and what we can do with the FAA.
Okay, thank you. And Stephen, in terms of enablers, the ecosystem enablers that will help to accelerate and to solve some of these challenges, what is your opinion? What do you think, Stephen?
Well, I think you know, the term ecosystem is sort of the buzzword of the day for enablers, because no one is an island, and it's never been more true than it is right now. And that's supply chain, that's engineering. I mean, that's funding. We can't survive without ecosystems, including digital infrastructure, like the advanced data analytics. And we haven't spoken about artificial intelligence, but we certainly know that artificial intelligence is going to be a huge enabler across the board. Cloud computing, and it's going to touch on safety, and it'll help speed up decision making. But of course, these things, what they're really going to do is instigate and promote creativity, and what we need in our industry, a little bit of resilience in this ecosystem. The next ecosystem, I think, enabler component would be sustainable energy, and I'm sure this conference will talk about that across the board. But aviation sustainable fuel is a pretty significant component for enablers. Innovative materials. Our helicopters are, I won't say that the aerodynamics and those things are more acute than they are anywhere else, but they seem to be a little bit more immediate. So the weight of the aircraft, the penalties are so dramatic. Finding ways to make things lighter and stronger, using carbon and those kinds of things are enablers. We need to find ways to reduce our fuel consumption. And of course, we got to consider the environmental impact. And I mentioned earlier about, it's not just about emissions. It's about noise emissions as well. It's how do we impact everything around us? And of course, we can't get away from the collaborative nature of really, we're all being force-fed this collaborative nature. You can't do it alone anymore. You can't do it alone financially. You can't do it alone in terms of engineering. you know, we're just a minute away from the next amazing innovation and technology, and how do we find a way to bring that in and integrate it? And then the mention about the discussion about the policies and the laws, and how do we integrate those? So all those things provide are enablers, create those regulatory frameworks that we need to work under. And finally, I think supply chain resilience, and then, you know, I think it's important that we care about the impact that it has on the people that work for us in our industry, because it's not useful for us to find ways to work everybody out of a job. You know, part of our obligation is to take care of folks, to be a part of the community. We need to find ways to bring these young, bright people in to work with us. So it's really not useful to find a way for one person to do what 10 people used to do. In some regards it is, but I think we have an obligation also to, in terms of this collaborative nature, but to also innovate in terms of making ourselves useful to the community at large.
Thank you, Stephen. Engineer Omar, so, and if you look at from the standpoint of manufacturing, supply chain, as Stephen was mentioning, is very important because more and more, so the manufacturing and the design of a plane is very integrated with different tiers. So what is your point of view, Engineer Omar, and how technology also will help you to be more efficient, streamlined processes, and so on and so forth? This is something that is also important because today, every business is technology, and technology is also enabling the business. So, Engineer Omar?
That's a great question. So at NAMI, we're hedging against building a digital warehouse for spare parts. And that digital warehouse, we're currently at a stage where we're building content with a digital library of spare parts. And we believe that platform will eliminate physical warehouses, where we can digitize parts, produce them on demand. And you can imagine Amazon or iTunes, where you process an item and you download and you immediately can use it. And with an enablement of 3D printing and advanced manufacturing, that's where we see it possible. And so we're working very diligently currently to build that content and to build the digital assets. And it requires a lot of data and qualification. So we're getting ourselves qualified from GAMI, MOD, OEMs to have these parts digitized and produced on demand. And we're also using AI, for example. We're trying to integrate AI where we can take a picture of a physical part and indicates the manufacturability of that part. And you can convert that part to a digital content by reverse engineering and later on produce it on demand. So AI is a great solution, and later on we can look at blockchain as well to digitize and trace the supply chain. We value the supply chain in additive, where we see an opportunity in material, in technology development, in production, and in post-processing, testing, and heat treatment. So that process can be digitized and localized in the kingdom. We're building an ecosystem around us to enable the digital inventory of spare parts to be printed on demand.
Thank you. And shifting gears towards the future of cities, destinations, so how the future of flights will change those ecosystems. Tom, what are your thoughts?
Well, the future of flight and how it will change ecosystems is I think is quite amazing. I mean, we see young people who really want to travel and be mobile,
Exactly.
right? But it's actually, and so really just enabling it in so many ways. I worked for an eVTOL company prior to this as well. But it's not, the youth are not the only ones. I actually, on the way over here, I was struck because I connected in London, and I bumped into somebody that works for our team. I've met him once. He's almost 90 years old. He started his career in the 50s working for, at that point, the Douglas Aircraft Company. One time I've met this man. He's worked for 3.5 years for our company on Zoom calls. He doesn't even have a camera. So he literally said to me, "How did you recognize me?" You know, I'd seen him once. He'd been into the office one time. Because when we started the company during COVID, I mean, just imagine, you've got a man working for you. He's almost 90 years old. You've met him one time. He's a fountain of knowledge. He knows everything. He's a propulsion guy. He's worked for Boeing for decades. Unbelievable. And so the mobility that that man has, right? He's able to work from home, stay safe during a pandemic, and then now he's traveling around the world, sees his boss for the first time. Actually, I'm not his boss, because this is an amazing thing about doing something. So people work for what they believe in. I tried to pay this man money. He wouldn't accept it. I tried to give him equity in our company. He wouldn't accept it. So this is a kind of a thing about like what happens in future in cities is travel. People are mission-based, they're purpose-based, and aviation is an enabler of that just as well as the technology. I think that's an important thing.
Thank you. And if we, from the passenger's standpoint, so we are all like to travel, moving around between cities, countries, so how the future of flight will change the passenger experience? So, Stephen.
I mean, I think it's very clear that the passenger wants an experience that is akin to sitting at home and having all the comforts at home. But one of the huge advantages, obviously, of aircraft is that you get somewhere fast. So if I look at sort of where we see it at Bombardier, obviously, with the focus of, enabling leaders that shape the world. If I take a look at where our development has been recently, if I look at the Challenger 3500, the changes there were predominantly focused on lowering the cabin altitude, because having a lower cabin altitude lets people arrive refreshed. We look at sound treatment because people actually want to have quietness and peace of travel. If I look at the medium term, there are things that we're doing on the Global 8000. Again, the customer experience, lowest cabin altitude, longer range, so that it's, as I said, from Riyadh, you could go anywhere basically on planet Earth on it. And again, that's what's important to a customer, because time is important. And then if we look at the longer term, of the EcoJet, one of the areas that we're looking at in terms of the EcoJet is that we don't believe that customers should have to compromise speed and comfort to be sustainable. That it may come to that, but at the moment, the design goal of that is really to have this product be able to take off from the same 5,000 feet runways that all of our products can take off from today, fly the same range, the same level of comfort. So again, what the customer really expects is really a home type environment in the air. And what that means is things like, is coffee, as we know, is the fuel of aviation, is coffee available at all times? Is the internet access speed equivalent to what I would have at home? Hugely important and hugely critical, and that's what we have to work on. Not just have it at a point in time, but also have the ability that is, as commercial technology progresses, be able to offer that to a customer in a timely fashion.
Thank you. So the future of flight is more sustainable, better connected, very efficient, and also we like to know and understand a little bit about what it means for Saudi Arabia, Engineer Omar. So how Saudi Arabia can capitalize of the future of flight and the next decades on this amazing transformation of the industry and the next generation of planes.
So Saudi's been positioned in a great location worldwide, and we've seen it today during a webinar. His Excellency Abdulaziz Al-Aufi, the head of GACA, just mentioned it. That is manufacturing, supply chain, talent development is key for the success of the aviation sector. And that's where we invest our resources toward that vision. And we have a clear goals set by His Royal Highness Mohammed bin Salman, the Vision 2030. To localize manufacturing, and there are a lot of programs that we leverage, such as the industrial participation set by GAMI and the Ministry of Industry. to localize high-value, knowledge-based manufacturing. And that's where we come in as NAMI.
Thank you. Thank you. Very insightful answers and key points. So I would like to move to the audience if there are questions to our panelists. So I don't know if, yeah, you have the mic. If someone can or wants to raise any question to our panelists, more than welcome. If you don't mind, Irene, I was introduce yourself just for.
Yeah, hi, my name is Mark Ralph, formerly SAMI, now the independent advisor in the Kingdom. I was particularly interested in the declaration of the environmental product that I think Stephen mentioned. Could you just explain that a little bit more? Because that is one of the big things about the life cycle that we sometimes miss. We focus on this bit, and we miss all of that. So I'd love to understand a bit more about how you did that and what it means to the sector.
Yeah, I mean, we did it first of all on the Global 7500, and basically it looks at, and the interesting thing is when you design and develop and manufacture an aircraft, it's not just our part of the chain, it's all of the suppliers that produce. And so on the 7500, it's the first business jet that we went out and did that. And basically it gives an idea, it gives the energy of fabrication, it gives the usage during the life, and it also talks about the end of life decommissioning of the product. And the interesting part of that, and now we have them available for each of our product lines, they're available online. And so when you look at it, it wasn't about saying this is better than others, it's more about drawing a line in the sand and giving numbers, and again in a very transparent way.
Any other question? Yep. They are.
Well, thank you. Great discussion. My name is Paul Trotter. I work for a company here in the region based in Dubai and in KSA. We build heliports. And so while I've heard a lot about the aircraft, what's being done in your, I suppose, knowledge about the facilities where you land? Because environmental factors are actually one of the strongest there, where the aircraft's taking off, particularly with vertical flight. So I'm kind of interested in that side of it from you guys as well.
Can you say again who you work for? What do you?
Unified Aviation.
Unified Aviation. Okay.
Yeah.
And you want to know about the environmental factors and that we were considering?
It's more about, so if we go into eVTOL, right? We go into the future.
Right.
Where are they going to land?
Yeah.
Right. This is a problem because putting them on top of buildings doesn't really work. You got to get up and down the building. Most big cities have no space to put half a football field of landing site, and that's a small one. So these are the questions like, what are we doing to deal with the environmental footprint? If you take Red Sea, they don't want to disturb the environment by putting a big concrete slab on the ground. So that's the sort of stuff, talk about lots of environmental stuff in the aircraft themselves, but I'm not hearing a lot about, well, they've all got to land.
That's a great thing. I've looked at this from a helicopter perspective, maybe more than the fixed wing guys. But you're right. I mean, the in between the places is not a problem, but when you get to the municipality, it becomes a problem. And it's as we talk about the growth of this innovation, and one thing I wanted to mention, and I didn't, was about accepting a certain amount of risk, because if you're going to innovate, you have to accept a certain amount of risk. It's just necessary. So, but the places that we can mitigate risk are, for example, the in-between, as we're walking our way into this autonomous flight, they're not going to want us to fly right over the top of the schools and the hospitals and all that stuff. So you got to go way around. And then we're going to have new policies and new laws about what does a landing area look like, and how close can buildings be, and those kind of things. So yeah, it's going to be a significant policy challenge. It's going to be a significant, the FAA is going to be, and EASA are going to be extremely interested in how it works. I really think AI is going to help a little bit of that because it's going to help find the best routes, the safest routes, and the most routes once the information is provided. But that is a huge issue. And you're right. We're so focused on inside the airplane that maybe we're not paying enough attention to the infrastructure and the routing. Also, how do autonomous aircraft integrate in the air traffic control ecosystem with manned aircraft? So those are issues, and I think it's a great question. I don't know.
I could point to a couple other things too. When you talk about the environment and landing an eVTOL, it's noise. You know, there's a company in the United States called Whisper Aero that's working on extremely quiet propulsor technology. We're very interested in. We're actually looking to deploy some technology that you're using for eVTOL on our test aircraft because it looks so promising. We are focused on noise as a byproduct of using a blended wing body jet. We're actually 4 times quieter using the same engines, right? Because you're putting them on top of an airframe. It's reflecting the noise upwards. So if you're talking about the effects or the environment around facilities and building more facilities, it feels a lot like that noise is at the top of that list of priorities. A lot of folks focused on it.
Any other question?
Hi, Nick Fergassi from Volocopter. I had a question, Tom. You made an interesting point about the FAA and their new mandate to not just be looking at safety naturally, but to also look at sustainability. My question would be two-part. One is, to the best of your knowledge, is that only particular to OEMs and the safety of the design and build of the aircraft, or does that also transcend into perhaps vertiport operations, Part 145 operations, Part 135 operations? Would that also be their mandate in there? And next question would be, that's FAA. Do you have any knowledge with respect to either GACA, YASA, other regulatory bodies, if that's also their mandate as well? Be very helpful.
I don't know how much I could help on that. I mean, we're focused on FAA because that's where we'll be certifying, and thankfully you certify in the United States and then everybody accepts that. I mean, I wish that were the world in, say, patents, for example, but you get a patent in the United States and then you have to go around. And so we love the fact that there's certification standards there. I also don't know with regard to whether it has to do with infrastructure. I believe, you know, the FAA's mandate is really around building aircraft. I can tell you it's been gratifying to talk to the FAA and have them, from our perspective, coming from a world of eVTOL, which is difficult because you've got a lot of new things, right? There's autonomy, and there's new configuration, new propulsion, new infrastructure, as you point out. When we got to the FAA, their reaction was, oh, thank God, this is a Part 25 aircraft. It's a plane. We have lots of people who know how to certify planes. So we're happy to see you. And of course, there's not a lot of new aircraft on the docket for the FAA once they get through this current, like, Boeing MAX 10, 777X. On the other side of that, there's not a new plane, and so we look forward to flying our full scale in 2027, and then moving into a certification program without another big program on their agenda. But I'm a big believer in forwarding the future of eVTOL as well, and the innovation group at the FAA is quite robust. They're putting a lot into this and a lot of funding, so I expect it's going to be fruitful.
I mean, maybe to your point, we do see good alignment between the FAA, Transport Canada, and EASA. I think if we look at even measuring carbon emissions, measuring carbon dioxide emissions 2028, we do see good alignment, and it's very important. So at least it's a level playing field for the reporting behind it.
Yeah.
Any other question? No more questions? So thank you very much. So please, let's give an applause to our panelists. I think it was a very insightful session. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Can you hear me, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome, everybody, to this session dedicated to regulating and scaling advanced air mobility, and in particular, eVTOLs, electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. First of all, big thanks to the organization of the Future Aviation Forum, and in particular, GACA, being the host of this fantastic event here in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, here in Riyadh. Your leadership role is really appreciated, as you know. Ladies and gentlemen, what a year has it been for advanced air mobility. Hundreds of companies have pushed forward their ambitious plans to create exciting new technologies, vehicles, service offerings, and business models. New regulations and guidelines continued to emerge, and commercial drone deliveries really took off, not only here, but also in other parts of the world. And these developments kept optimism over the past year, while some analysts already expected major bumps for the sector. But progress must continue to maintain investor interest. There are only still a few aircraft really certified. And in particular, the industry must solve some big questions that persist around the pace of technology advancements, public acceptance, regulatory approvals, and of course, the economics must make sense. And with so much uncertainty, it's time to take stock to see where the industry stands today, and that we are going to discuss the key challenges going forward. My name is Geert Mulder. I'm an associate partner in McKinsey's office in Amsterdam, and I dedicate my career to sustainability in aviation with a particular interest for this topic. And we will have an interesting group of panelists that joins us here today. But before we go there, I want to briefly set the scene with you. What is advanced air mobility? And everybody has their own ideas, but we typically break it down into 4 categories. It starts with eVTOLs, electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. Those are typically aircraft with 2 to 10 seats operating in a dense network of vertiports and typically serve use cases in urban areas. Then there are the drones, and we saw them flying here today already. Drones have multiple different use cases these days. They range from deliveries, it is last mile logistics, restaurant deliveries, and so forth. Examples there are drone up, wing and zip line. But there are also industrial use cases, such as inspections, surveying, and fertilizer and seed dispersion. Examples of drone companies are Elroy Air and Egg Eagle. Then we have regional air mobility. This really comes down to retrofitting an existing aircraft architecture with new propulsion technologies such as hydrogen and battery electric and hybrid forms. Examples are Zero Avia, Hard Aerospace, and Viridian. And lastly, we see the rise of supersonic and hypersonic flight. Futuristic aircraft flying 2.5 times the speed of a regular aircraft. And we see them aimed at specific routes that they want to operate. And examples there are Boom and Spike Aerospace. But our session today, ladies and gentlemen, is mostly focused on eVTOLs, electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. Taking stock of the investments over the past year. As McKinsey, we track all publicly announced investments in advanced air mobility companies across the different segments that I just explained. And on this chart, you see them since 2017 all the way up to this year. And what is interesting to see is that during the pandemic, the funding really boomed. As you can see, 6.8 billion US invested in those companies in 2021. But still, in 2023, investors, although it is 9% lower than in 2022, you see that the number of deals went up significantly. The blue line represents the number of deals, and the columns represent the total funding. So you see that in 2023, almost a doubling of deals was announced. What is also interesting to see is that the investor interest is shifting between the segments. The segments are colored, and you see them in the legend on the top right. Investments in regional air mobility dropped almost 50%, and also eVTOLs, that is the white area, dropped almost 50% in 2023 versus 2022. On the other hand, we see cargo, delivery and surveillance drones saw massive growth to over 2 billion US, and that's a record for that segment last year. But there are some other key facts that I want to share with you about last year's advanced air mobility. The open order backlog that grew to over 21,000 globally. The sector has delivered more than 1 million drone delivery flights, and 7 companies disclosed more than 8,000 hours of flight testing. We see a growing supplier base with more than 1,000 deals being made between advanced air mobility players and suppliers. And we see continued progress on the regulatory side, not only in the US and Europe, but also in China, where they certified EHang as the first company to receive an aircraft type certification in 2023. Looking backwards, there is great momentum, as I just shared. But the facts are the facts. We see a drop in investor interest. At the same time, many companies are dying for extra capital. So it is important to keep investor attraction high. And that's why we're going to discuss today all those uncertainties to make sure that those companies meet their requirements. So, looking forward, what are the key challenges that we see? There are a couple of big questions that need to be solved. First and foremost, how do we ensure attractive economics, both for operators as well as for OEMs and other parties? Second, how do we make sure we drive seamless operations for our passengers? You can imagine, if you can choose between driving a car and flying, then it needs to be attractive. Of course, flying goes faster, but there's also more hassle involved. With your car, you have a lot of flexibility. With some scheduled operations, you may not have that. So there are many factors that drive customer experience. How do we drive a regulatory framework? How do we make sure that we get timely approvals that really enable the industry to progress? And how to grow public acceptance, how to grow confidence not only with passengers but also with local governments, cities and municipalities, especially in urban areas where those aircraft will be flying over your head. And how do we build the right infrastructure in parallel that conveniently connects the advanced air mobility with other modes of transport? And there are many uncertainties around all of these, and that's what we would like to discuss today with the panel. But first, let me take you to a couple of quick deep dives on some of those points. First of all, the unit economics. eVTOL aircraft, you could call them flying helicopter or electric taxis. That's what we like to compare them to. So here you see a conceptual view of the unit cost of a helicopter, a traditional helicopter, versus the potential unit cost of an eVTOL player. And of course, we hope and we aim as an industry to make the eVTOL cost lower and to make it more attractive to operate this. But there are so many challenges to achieve those along different buckets, as you can see. There are challenges around maintenance. How do you optimize battery lifetimes? At the same time, we do predict maintenance costs will be lower, as you have with electric cars, less moving parts, less hydraulics, etc. When we talk about energy cost, how can we make sure eVTOL aircraft energy cost is lower? Electricity is important, and of course, in areas with a lot of renewable energy at lower cost available, that is easier. When it comes to the pilot, how can we make use of more autonomy and reduce pilot workloads? Some may even have no pilot on board at all. When it comes to infrastructure, how are we building highly utilized infrastructure in optimized locations? And of course, when it comes to utilization, which business models, how can operators drive business models that maximize utilization and therefore lower unit cost? All key challenges on the economic side. When we move to the regulatory side, there are many challenges to overcome still. And we are very much encouraged by the FAA and EASA on their progress recently. And of course also to China, where they moved into type certification. Both FAA and EASA have been working with advanced air mobility stakeholders over the recent years and have appointed permanent leaders to the topic, and that's great to see. And indeed this year, EASA and the FAA may even certify one of the aircraft. Let's see. But they are not the only bodies that impact regulations. There are many more types of regulations that need to be in place. Aircraft type certification is only the first step. There's production certification and to ensure airworthiness. There's MRO certification to ensure continued airworthiness. And of course, then on the operator side, there is the pilot, operator, and training certification. The airspace and operating rules play a huge role when it comes to air traffic management. And obviously, the standards and guidance to ensure infrastructure is in place are very important too. I'm from the Netherlands, and you may have read in the news that my government tried to limit the number of movements at Schiphol Airport, because on top of all of those, let's say, global or regional regulations, there's also local regulations around noise, around environmental impact, around privacy, and so forth. A big topic where we need a lot of breakthroughs to really unlock this sector. Then to the public, and I briefly wanted to share what came out of a large survey we did over the past year. We asked many travelers, can you rate your top 3 concerns when it comes to the rise of eVTOLs? How are you thinking about that? And here you see the number of concerns mentioned. You see that 38% of the surveyees mentioned noise-related concerns, local and global environmental concerns, and safety concerns. And we will talk about those during the panel. Further, there are many more concerns that arise, and it's clear that the industry has some work to do to really win the public at different levels. But then bringing us back here to the Middle East and into Saudi Arabia in particular. This is a place to be. This is the place where we already see a lot of movement, a lot of investor interest, and a lot of data, the first movements and traction already. We see Saudia working with Lilium in the eVTOL space. We see Neom and Volocopter already partnering, and maybe we hear a bit more about that later. And Flynas and Eve Air Mobility have signed an MOU to explore further operations in Saudi Arabia. Not only is Saudi Arabia a very interesting place to be when it comes to advanced air mobility, Saudi Arabia is also a place with a very large amount of solar energy, if you will. So you can imagine that other areas in sustainable aviation, like the development of e-fuels and synthetic fuels, could also very much be scaled here in the kingdom. Before we move into the more details, a little note of advertisement from on behalf of McKinsey & Company. We continue to stay on top of this, and please get in touch with us. And we continue to publish white papers, blog posts, and host a lot of webinars. You may have seen our Advanced Air Mobility webinar, which you are very much invited to join going forward. Then, ladies and gentlemen, it is time to talk about the most critical pieces of this session. On the right-hand side, you see what we're going to do. We are going to invite our panelists to talk about the ecosystem. How can we develop the ecosystem? We're going to speak about the public acceptance piece, about building the infrastructure. Regulations and certifications are a crucial thing, as we just discussed. And we're going to address the Middle East's unique considerations in advanced air mobility. And therefore, I would like to introduce to you the different colleagues that we have in front and invite them to the stage. And we start with Hatim Murad, General Manager Regulations and Standards at GACA, representing our host organization today. Then John Reevy. John is the Director and Principal Account Leader for Aviation at Mott MacDonald. Mott MacDonald is a global engineering, management and development consultancy. John has been leading the company's journey in advanced air mobility, supporting clients with advisory, planning and design. We will remove this so that you can all see the panel. That makes sense.
There's assigned seating. It's not because I don't like Hatim.
Then I would like to introduce Oliver Reinhardt, Chief Risk and Verification Officer at Volocopter. And as you all know, Volocopter is developing an inner-city eVTOL called VoloCity to be certified this year. And Oliver's responsibility is really actually to get that done. Then we have Dan Sloat, founder and president of the Advanced Air Mobility Institute. the Advanced Air Mobility Institute has the aim to advocate advanced air mobility to the broader public, and his personal mission is really to connect the dots between engineers, governments, businesses, and public institutions. Then Federico Fernandez, Associate Director at WISE Aerospace and Travel. WISE is a consultancy innovation company dealing with the investments in startups and prototyping in the Middle East. As a founder, Associate Director, he's leading his airline clients, his government clients, and airport customers. Is Nikhil here?
Yeah.
Here he is.
He made it.
Last but not least, Nikhil, welcome to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Nikhil Goel, CCO at Archer, where Nikhil leads Archer's business development, international expansion, product and marketing. And before joining Archer, thank you to make it in time, by the way. Before joining Archer, Nikhil founded and led Uber Elevate. It will be a challenge to discuss all of those themes with this great crowd, but we start with building the advanced air mobility ecosystem. And the first question I would like to address to Oliver: what are the key elements of a successful air mobility ecosystem?
Actually, the two key elements that I'm seeing, you touched upon these. Number one is the regulatory framework. And one of the elements we are observing with our novel types of aircraft is that aircraft type certification, operation of the aircraft, support of the aircraft, ground infrastructure, handling of the aircraft is much more entwined and connected to each other than we know it from legacy aviation. So really getting one consistent set of regulatory framework in place is a crucial thing to have, and that's one of the key deal makers to make it really happen. And that's directly followed then by our infrastructure partners. With looking at our product flying really into the cities, we have to play with a number of partners that typically did not participate in aviation. So we need to get the city municipalities much more in. We need to get ground infrastructure, building infrastructure much more into it, firefighters, all those elements. They are typically not that involved within the cities. That's new players, and we need to get them on board. That's, to me, the two key factors to make it happen.
Very interesting. Hatim, can you add on that from the GACA perspective?
Thanks. To complement what Oliver was talking about, if there is one major element that helps in the ecosystem, is basically the establishment of a robust, dynamic, transparent national roadmap. I'm talking about the state level here. And one of the products of that roadmap is basically a dynamic regulatory framework. And that's what our colleagues, stakeholders, OEM are looking for. Now, that roadmap actually consists of all the major elements, be it social, technical, socio-technical, legislative, security. Now, all of these elements there are defined with their role into that advanced air mobility new entrant technologies. Now, once their role is defined, the interrelationships between all of those elements are defined, and then eventually they would constitute this dynamic roadmap. So that's what I try to make it brief, though.
Very good. And if you look at other elements of the ecosystem, Dan, we mentioned cybersecurity and education. How do you look at that?
Yes, so cybersecurity, at the Advanced Air Mobility Institute, we very much include and track development on the UAS drone side. Not many people are aware, but in the United States anyway, it's estimated that at most only about 15% of drones are controlled by with an encrypted signal, right? So it could be closer to 90% that have no encryption whatsoever, making these vehicles quite susceptible to hacking. We don't have any reason to doubt that leading OEMs, of course, like Volocopter, Archer, would have any issues, especially on the front end with piloted operations. But we are concerned that once operations get underway, there may be some new entrants who, in the interest of trying to undercut, offer cheaper, more attractive prices, may look to scale back on cybersecurity investment as a means to be a bit more competitive. So at the Advanced Air Mobility Institute, we're working hard to try to encourage the kind of policy that ensures that when it comes to passenger operations, that's something that we absolutely cannot afford to skimp out on. On the education piece, we're trying to do our part as a nonprofit, right? Of course, because we don't have that profit incentive, it's a bit easier for average, everyday people to be a bit more open-minded about the potential for this ecosystem.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of work to be done. Fortunately, we're developing partnerships with local museums. A lot of research is pointing to the fact that when folks are interested in learning more about, especially advancements in technology like this, museums are precisely what are best trusted. So we're establishing a number of partnerships like that.
Very interesting. Nikhil, from the Archer perspective, I know you have been running a couple of test flights already earlier this year. Can you share a bit of that? And also, what can you tell us about the economics of your product?
Yeah, so we fly every day, nearly every day, at our headquarters in Salinas, California. So it's just outside of Silicon Valley. And not only do we fly every day, but we're starting to ramp up the cadence of our operations so that we can start to mimic what an operational cadence would look like. And that's really important for a few reasons. One is obviously to get reps on the airplane, but then two is, in parallel to that, we're building 6 conforming aircraft. So that means most, if not all, of the subsystems and components on those aircrafts conform to the FAA type definition. And with those, we'll be able to begin for-credit testing with the FAA. So we're working at that at our headquarters every day. And obviously the long-term vision is, to your presentation's point, to get this to a price point that's economically feasible for this to be an everyday sort of transport. So on day one, we expect it will be less than half the price of a helicopter, similar to what it would cost for, say, an Uber Black or a town car service. But then very, very quickly, we'll get to the price point of an Uber X. So our goal in the near term is to be competitive with taxis or Uber, so that it would be just as affordable to fly to work as it would be to take a taxi to work.
Very interesting. It's really futuristic, but still very close already. When we move to the, let's say, the public acceptance piece, we already spoke about it in the presentation. Federico, if you look at the main barriers of how public acceptance can be achieved, what are you thinking of?
I think that public acceptance now, at this moment, for us that are really on the field, we're still not feeling it, to be quite honest. We feel the different entities, like civil aviation authorities, like manufacturers, airspace controllers, they have their own preoccupations. I would say that we are feeling right now is the bump against the wall called safety and procedures in aviation. So how are you going to do this? How are we going to integrate this? So the other day I had a customer, less than 1 year before this date, that he made a request of information for the main traffic managers, equipment manufacturers. They didn't have a product for this. We see that product in some startups, and we see also those kind of, for example, subsystems, operational systems, and systems that will allow the eVTOLs to fly in the corridor or VFR. They are sparse startups. Civil aviation authorities don't understand them, because how can you integrate them? So this has become one of the biggest barriers in the development, and that's one of the reasons why, for example, we don't have drones. So have you thought why we don't have drones flying? There's something missing, and that part is now more important than public acceptance. Public acceptance, I think, to be quite honest, at the beginning I thought it was a big problem. Public accepts what civil aviation authority says. They are okay with it, we will fly.
That's an interesting perspective. John, what is your perspective on public acceptance?
I think public acceptance safety is going to be that key factor, that turn point, because there's too much unknown at the moment. People understand helicopters, yes. People understand road transport, but when you start adding electric mobilization, again, it reverts back to what we see with vehicles and the challenges of, do you have enough energy to supply the power? What happens if my power runs out while I'm in flight? And the big learning from electric cars at the moment is that range anxiety. So even though you're on the ground, you still have range anxiety. If you press the accelerator slightly more, the range starts to decrease. That, as a consumer, that's my knowledge of an electric vehicle. What does that mean when I'm in the airspace?
Exactly.
What is my
I
route
have range
for
anxiety
exit?
with my electric car already.
So I think for me, whilst there's a lot of opportunity, it's convincing the general public that the level of safety we have in aviation has been a progression over a number of years. Advanced air mobility is going to be no different. There is a significant difficulty to get through certifications. It's not, as your slide showed, it's not just about certification of the aircraft. It's about mass production. It's about maintenance. It's about continual supply. It's about your pilot licensing as well. And and that's the other thing. When you start to talk about autonomy, the unknown individual starts to think about my teenage son sitting in a bedroom playing on an Xbox. That is not what this industry is about. This industry is starting with a very, very high base, either safety as a key benchmark.
We need to educate the public. You told it as well. Hatim, how can GACA or the government play a role in educating the public?
True. I fully agree with Federico was mentioning is the public would believe what the authority says.
Exactly.
And that is essentially true. And why is that? Because the legislator or the authority are the public servants, and they're supposed to be serving the best interest of the public. Okay, so that goes back to the roadmap I mentioned at the very beginning.
Yeah.
For example, in Saudi Arabia, the public acceptance is one major element within the roadmap, whereby it's a commitment on the authority to continuously update and publish whatever that needs to be published to the public regarding the, let's say, the safety and the security status quo of such new entrant.
Yeah, and with making it public or publishing it,
Yeah.
what does it mean in practice? Do you also get on the television and you make
Exactly.
it real?
Exactly, yes. That's what we're planning to do, or that we're moving towards, actually. Yeah.
Oliver, what are, in your view, the main concerns and barriers when it comes to public acceptance?
Well, definitely I can second that public acceptance is one of the big challenges we have to overcome. And we found one very simple recipe to this. Since 2017, we are flying in public. We are not just flying in our backyard. We are not just throwing out a press release saying, oh, we have done so many flights. We are flying in public. Make it visible to everybody out there. Talk to the people. And I mean, it's natural. That's something completely new that gets there. Like you said, I mean, it's people know fixed-wing aircraft, they know a helicopter, they know their cars, they know their challenges. All the keywords that you mentioned are right. But how do you overcome this? By showing them, yes, it's something fresh, but it's actually nothing to be in fear of. We have discussions about noise. We were flying multiple times, for example, in Paris, also at the Paris Air Show, at the last one. And many people, they completely missed us flying, even if we were flying every day, opening the afternoon air show panel. They just missed it because they didn't hear it. There are people thinking, okay, the skies will be cluttered with this vehicle, Fifth Element movie style. No, many people also there, even if they noticed, okay, we took off, they had difficulties to spot us in the sky. Yeah. Because it's a small aircraft and it really blends into the skies. Those are the elements we need to get out. And then also, last but not least, really on the safety, advocating it. I mean, we are certifying with EASA. EASA is demanding from us the very same safety levels as all commercial airliners, above helicopters. Strongest safety levels that we can do. And yes, that was one of the biggest tasks that we had, to iterate our architecture that is capable to do no single failure catastrophic, that it is capable to do 10 to the -9 reliability over the full lifetime of the aircraft. And that's the messages we need to bring out. And we can do this at best by showcasing it to the people. That's why we are pushing massively to make sure that Paris, August, we will have something flying in the skies that the people can see it and get more and more educated. And you might have followed it on the news.
Is
I mean, the
there an
Paris
update?
citizens, they are a little bit difficult at times. So that means if we can do it there, we can do it likely anywhere. And that's the key that we found to really do this. And that's also my invite to all the OEMs I'm speaking to. Please come out and go flying. We are so happy that in November we had one of the other the other fellows flying in New York jointly in there. I'm looking forward to see you guys flying in person then. That's the best that we can do for our industry.
Nikhil, you want to add to this from your perspective?
No, look, I couldn't agree more. I think the best way to get public acceptance is to be in public versus talking about it. And so right now we're flying in California, sort of close to home, and we have visitors out there nearly every day. So we're certainly doing a lot of that, and we're excited to fly in many cities all over the world, probably sooner than most people think.
So in 2 years from now, 3 years from now, where do the two of you stand when it comes to where can we see you fly? In how many cities?
Well, I think that's a tougher question to answer, probably for both of us. Look, I mean, I can only speak for myself. For Archer, Archer's got plans in the UAE we've talked about publicly for quite a while. Just this morning, we signed an agreement with Etihad Training to begin recruiting and training pilots. So, we're getting real in terms of bringing on the workforce, starting to train the workforce there in the UAE. Just a few weeks ago, we announced a multi-$100 million investment by the Abu Dhabi Investment Office to accelerate our commercial launch there. The goal is to do that by the end of next year. And then in India, we're working with Interglobe, the third largest airline in the world, the market leader in India. They've bought $1 billion worth of our aircraft. Their chairman, Rahul Bhatia, who's one of the greatest aviation pioneers in our lifetime, came out to our headquarters earlier this week to go spend some time with the team and with our facilities. And then we've got a lot more coming down the pipe that we haven't talked about publicly yet.
Thank you very much. I want to jump from public acceptance to the infrastructure side, because we can all talk about those great flying aircraft, but you need some infrastructure to actually mobilize them. And I'm looking at John already. What infrastructure is required to support the operation of advanced air mobility?
So I think the first thing to note is the absence of investment in infrastructure so far. So when you looked at your charts earlier, that's predominantly into the aircraft research and development. So the infrastructure needs to catch up. So I work with Mott MacDonald. We're an engineering consultancy. We're working with various OEMs and vertiport operators to start to develop vertiports and to integrate these into an urban environment or into a semi-urban, sort of on the outskirts of a city environment. The challenges are particular that whenever you need to build something new in a city, particularly one that's been around for 100 years, you can't just build it and integrate it. So integration is going to be the key thing from the point of view of utilities, connectivity, but primarily from the point of view of airspace integration. So when we look at a particular site, so although we're an engineering company, we will look at, from an advisory point of view, where do you actually need to build a vertiport that has a demand trigger. Yep. A vertiport needs to connect into something that's going to drive demand. So is it a multimodal hub, a train station, an airport? Is it a medical case, so it's connecting into a hospital? And those start to drive the infrastructure connection. So not just about the utilities, but how do you actually move people between the two? But where we start with is the first criteria is going to be your airspace integration. Most cities already have regulations and airways above the cities and different challenges with what's flying there. And if I take London as an example, a straight line from London City Airport to London Heathrow Airport, you've got 9 different regulators and police forces that you need authority to fly on the day. Every time you cross the Thames, you've got to notify the Thames police. So a straight line flight suddenly becomes impossible. So looking at a hub or a vertiport from a pure airspace integration point of view, obstacle limitations, an urban centre becomes quite challenging. So we have to start to raise the FATO, the flight, the final approach takeoff platform. That starts to create different challenges as well. We've then found a new challenge in civil aviation has an excellent set of regulations that have a good basis globally that we hang on to. And EASA and FAA have certainly been leading that. But where we're starting to develop vertiports that are below 25 meters in elevation but not on ground level, we're conflicting with building codes and fire standards. And that's been a big eye-opener for us, because the particularly fire regulations and what they want on the side of buildings, so if you're going on the top of a car park, for example, you need a certain structure to the side of the building so that the fire emergency services can access the building. That creates a wall, which with a eVTOL trying to take off and you've got the downwash, you're creating eddies, and then safety becomes a really key thing in what we're looking at from the point of view of design of a vertiport. One other thing to add into this is, to make money on an eVTOL operation, you can't be sitting on the ground for long. So there's the electric infrastructure required to make sure that we can do quick charging, but also we don't want to generate large platforms where you've got aircraft sitting charging. We're in an urban environment, real estate is premium, so we actually, from a real estate perspective, we want the eVTOLs turning around quickly as well, because the infrastructure is not going to be significantly large. And then that benefits the OEMs, because then they get the revenue from that. So those are challenges just before we even start designing something.
Thank you. Dan, you wanted to add, I think, on the infrastructure side.
Yes, absolutely agree with John's point. And to build on that further, we know that there's a number of communities that are more or less already at capacity, right? That they would need to build, invest quite a bit more in infrastructure to allow for these kind of operations. And frankly, we just need more analysis kind of across the board. What's interesting is NASA and the Department of Energy are currently undertaking a study to better understand can airports and one day vertiports actually act as an energy node, right? And that very much leads into better opportunities for public acceptance, because anywhere that there's a viable energy node, those communities can say, okay, I'm in support of eVTOL operations, whether or not I ever plan on being a passenger or for cargo operations to receive packages. Instead, they're looking at it and saying, well, if this is going to reduce the possibility that I'll experience a blackout in my neighborhood, then I'm absolutely for it. At the AM Institute, we're working with a number of infrastructure partners to identify, can we approach this in a way airports have less concern about utilization on the front end. People unfamiliar with this space aren't aware that we've got a split in the charging protocol. So we think one option, of course, would be a universal standard for everyone, but there is quite a bit of potential with the GACS charging protocol. So we're working with a partner to develop a dual protocol charging system, precisely because there are plenty of communities with such limited capacity, right? Where even if money wasn't an issue, they can really only afford, from an energy perspective, to have a single charging station, at least in these early days.
Very interesting. Frederico, you wanted to add another point?
I just wanted to add, I will be the third guy in this panel to talk about infrastructure, to see how important it is, infrastructure. And I'm going to tell you something that I think. Infrastructure might well be the item or the vector that is making this delay of the technology to be actually running. For me, there's two kinds of infrastructure. The first one is the actual vertiport infrastructure that we need to address since the beginning, because we cannot have the same cost as an helipad. We can't. It's impossible. Or else geographic will tell the truth. We don't have a business model of 60%. We cannot manage Uber if we have the same cost of infrastructure for any kind of reasons. And then the second kind of infrastructure is the operating control center. That sometimes the second type of infrastructure will be inserted in the business model of the first infrastructure that I just mentioned. So airports or vertiports will like to run operations. And operations, if you go to AKO assembly, you will see them for commercial aviation. asking each other, how can they invest more in infrastructure for air traffic control management in the world? So if commercial aviation doesn't have the capacity now for their own means, how can we accelerate all this innovation to come to market in terms of air traffic control management and building all these issues? Infrastructure is definitely key word.
I absolutely think so. Hati, maybe last one on infrastructure for you. How does Saudi Arabia aim to address those challenges when it comes to charging, when it comes to the other challenges you just mentioned?
Thank you. As I was listening to the colleagues here, I have my colleague sitting with me here. We kind of remember the daily issues that we deal with. All of these things and not us, all the authorities are dealing with on a daily basis, actually. These are fundamental elements of the roadmaps. But primarily, infrastructures, from our very, very simplistic perspective, are the vertiports and work, benchmarking, what have you, is taking place all over, all the times about these things. Now, an interesting challenge is that, since you mentioned ICAO, well, we all know ICAO is International Civil Aviation. And most of these applications are domestic. So when we do benchmarking, of course, we need to be very selective and very careful when we look at what other authorities and how they handle these matters. Okay, so we need to be more likely our own judges when it comes to safety lines. Now, that's one thing. Now, the other thing is the charging, the infrastructure for the electric charging. That's already been addressed internally in Saudi Arabia, in the same manner, by the way, as it has been addressed some years back for the electric cars. So plans are there in this country to build the infrastructure for the electric cars, and as well as the charging of the electric airplanes. But the biggest issue here is the actual airspace infrastructure. Now, that's the biggest challenge, and we've seen it all over the world, actually. Is this new thing called the lower airspace with these different type of users, the existing helicopters, this army of unmanned delivery vehicles, plus the advanced air mobility air taxis. An example for that is what took place in Europe already, the Airspace concept, which has been already defined and being always updated and modified. Similar in the USA, by the way, the FAA with NASA and how they do it. And the same thing is happening here, actually. We're in the process of defining the technologies being used, the stages and the roadmap for that airspace management. So that's really one of the biggest challenges for us here.
John, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, just add as well. Another component to the infrastructure ecosystem is not just the vertiport and the flights that we think of. It's where's the maintenance facility? Where's your flight crew training facility? If in a deal similar to what's happening in Abu Dhabi, is there an assembly plant infrastructure as well? Those can't be too far away from the city centre either, but they're going to be too large to have real estate. So it's how do those parts of infrastructure connect into the ecosystem as well, that you complete your network and you have an operation that's successful.
Thank you very much. It's a great recap of the whole space of infrastructure that we need. And we're not there yet. But we also need to get certified, and we have a lot of work to do on the regulatory side. And I want to jump to the next theme, because I think that's a critical theme also in the light of this session. Maybe starting with Oliver. What are the international standards and harmonization efforts in the certification of air mobility that you think is needed?
Well, that's another challenge in itself, and I have the pleasure to serve also as the co-chair of the EuroCAE Working Group 112 on eVTOL aircrafts doing industry standards, and co-chair of the Gamma Electric Propulsion Innovation Committee, where we are in both groupings, we are heavily working towards getting the standards in place, getting this all done. I mean, it's a broader topic. First of all, we unfortunately are living in a situation where those two initial authorities that launched off to create regulatory frameworks have started off in slightly different directions. That's causing some challenges, as of course, for us as the industry, we want to have a common system that we can certify our aircrafts to and then bring them to the different states of registry where they can be operated. We didn't start off in that way. Thanks to a lot of work and also a lot of openness from the different authorities, this is starting to come a bit closer together now. We are not yet fully there, and we will never have a fully unified regulatory framework. We don't have it in other areas of aviation. There are always national specifics, and that makes sense, but the general basic framework needs to come together.
And can you elucidate a bit on the two different paths that you just spoke about?
What those two different paths are?
Yeah.
I mean, let's start with our state of design. So Europe, EASA, once we were approaching EASA, that was in spring 2017 when I had my first meeting with them and told them, look, here is this new fancy tool that we want to do. How can we approach certification of it? Luckily, in Europe, we had a rulemaking activity for large cargo unmanned operations, intercontinental, already kicked off. So EASA decided, okay, let's enhance the scope of work of this and include these little aircrafts as well. So the electric aviation, city flights, everything that we are doing now with our eVTOL aircrafts was included there, and was included from the start with saying, we need a certification for the product. We need operating regulations, we need pilot training regulations, we need maintenance regulations, and we need infrastructure regulations. So EASA started to do this in 2017, and we are happy to say that in the meantime, all those regulations are in place and available. It's a reliable basis, and like I mentioned before, it needs to be consistent and matching to each other. It's there.
That's a massive achievement already.
That is a massive achievement already. Unfortunately, at the very same time when this started also on the US side, and Nikhil for sure can also compliment on this, the FAA was not in that comfortable position to be able to set something specifically up. There is a lot of reasons behind that, of course. So what was done there was basically looking at, okay, how can we deal with the systems that we have in place? We had done a major renovation of CS, and in that case, Part 23, where I also had the luxury to be involved in, which brought it to performance-based regulations more. Yeah. And this allows for much more room to then adopt also other types of aircraft. Unfortunately, now in that system, each applicant needs to get its own specific set of requirements defined, publicly commented, reworded, refined, and set out. Also on the operational side is now a path chosen through an SFAR instead of having a direct operating regulations in place. That's all more, so to say, a little bit more ambulant approaches in it. There were good reasons for it to start it this way, but in the end, that made it drift off a little bit aside. So luckily, and just in the past few weeks, there were several sessions between the authorities, not just the EASA, FAA, also other authorities and involved in, to really start to come to more and more common grounds and to converge more into this. And that's really what we need to push forward to, aside from developing the industry standards that are complementing all this set of requirements.
Nikhil, you wanted to comment on the US side of this story?
Yeah, I mean, look, for us, the regulatory story has been incredibly promising. I was just with the FAA Administrator, Mike Whitaker, a couple of weeks ago in DC. Known him for a long time, and what's great is he comes from the industry. He spent years, when he was working for Michael Huerta, he spent time with the industry. Of course, then he went to Hyundai, where he was a senior executive for Supernal, so he understands the challenges of these aircraft, not only the OEM side, but the operations side. So he's always lent us a very understanding ear, and he and the team have done a phenomenal job really pushing the ball on how to get certified in the U.S. I think as we mentioned at our earnings release recently, we are on track to have our final airworthiness criteria published within the next month. And that's a really big step. I mean, that would be sort of only 2 OEMs in the United States that have sort of reached that phase. And it really gives us comfort, as I mentioned earlier, to start building our conforming aircraft and enter that final stage of certification. In parallel with that, we're also working very closely with the GCA and the UAE. They remain committed to certifying us to begin commercial operations as soon as next year in the country. I believe a lot of that is going to be really strong across the Middle East with GACA here and other regulatory organizations across the GCC. And then the DGCA in India has been equally progressive. You know, everyone from the Prime Minister down to the DG of the DGCA, Mr. Vikram Devdutt, have all looked at this and said, the FAA is the state of design. We're all going to work towards the same safety standards, but we're going to accelerate the commercialization and the certification here in country. And so it's been pretty beautiful to see it all come together in a really promising way. And that's been exciting for us.
Very good. And then if we talk about convergence of regulations, any perspectives from your institute as well on this?
So we now have 2 regulatory affairs officers at the Advanced Air Mobility Institute. So much of our focus with our board of liaisons, which we now have representatives to 50 countries, is trying to identify what the general public seems to be responding to, again, in pursuit of that public acceptance. I think what was so interesting about the survey that you showed, safety wasn't number 1.
Correct.
Right?
But it was in the top 3.
What's that?
It was in the top 3, though.
It was in the top 3. Well, and I think from a regulatory perspective, right, the general public, they trust civil aviation authorities. I think they just expect flat out that no new form of transportation would ever be permitted if it wasn't consistently safe.
Of course.
So we're actually spending more time from a regulatory perspective trying to understand what are all those other factors that the general public seems to consider deal breakers on whether or not they would support in their own respective way.
Great. Any other comments on the regulatory side? Maybe a team directly from GACA.
Thank you. Very quickly, I'm glad our colleague from Volocopter highlighted the challenges they face with different authorities. For example, EASA, FAA. Now, this is an OEM, let alone an authority of a country like Saudi Arabia. Here we are. This is Saudi Arabia. This is a potential place for products from Archer, from Volocopter, from EHAG, from Lilium, and what have you. And they come from different authorities. Just an example.
Yeah.
We know for sure the direction taken by the FAA regarding this advanced air mobility, not to go through the eVTOL or the VTOL, but rather to go to the power lift. I think they still do, right? While in EASA, we went to the VTOL, and then we have a host of regulations that are built around that. Now, luckily, the Chinese authority went, in a way, more harmonized with Europe. Now, we become a state of operator, right? And we've been working for a while now to harmonize our way of absorbing or accommodating these different products from different authorities within our own regulation in a harmonized manner that maintains the required level of safety as we perceive it. But I must admit it's a challenge. This relation. We've been living this way for all those years with these transport aircraft. Right. I mean, we know the FAA design standards are, well, they have differences than the EASA. And we have to live with that. We have to harmonize, and we have to strike a balance. Again, not to make any major obstacles to the user, who are the operators, the airlines, and the public as well. Thank you.
Big challenges, I would say. So enough to do for GACA going forward. I want to jump to the Middle East, because we are here for a reason. Starting with you, because you work in the Middle East. What are the unique considerations for adoption of advanced air mobility in the Middle East, from your perspective?
I think the Middle East is very well equipped, and since the 2016, with the eyes on this kind of technologies, first trying to promote them, trying to bring this innovation into the Middle East by opening the doors, listening to the business models. And what we said now, discussing about harmonization, is very clear. I have a clear example. We were trying to make possible one flight with one OMEs, original equipment manufacturer. And at some point where the team of that Civil Aviation Authority in the Middle East was gathered, they said, do they have the experimental license from EASA and FAA? If they do, we're going to look at it, harmonize it, and we go.
Yeah.
I don't think this is possible the other way. Okay, there is no bilateral agreement, but the other way is more difficult. So here you will find the speed, you will find the equity, you will find the disruption, the capability of disrupt. Let's do it. Why not? Let's think about it. Let's make it happen. And then you will find also this very unique integrated strategic thinking that, for example, what's happening with Archer in Abu Dhabi. It's amazing. This will empower them and Abu Dhabi to do great things very fast. The same thing what is happening here with Volocopter and Lilium. So Middle East will definitely lead on this part, using the capability that they have to harmonize with civil aviation authorities. Would they have bilateral agreements to run faster?
Very good, thank you very much. John, any other reflections in the Middle East in particular from the infrastructure side?
Yeah, I think what we've seen and what's become very apparent in the last year is that the Middle East is in the Middle East because the governments, the regulators, the vision is slightly different. The ambition is there, but the support is there as well. So getting through the regulatory challenges, inviting the industry to the country rather than inviting individual suppliers, I think is a big difference as well. So that it's a competitive market, but it's a big enough market that everyone's playing in it. We're excited because we're also involved in it, and there's a project in Dubai with Skyports and the Road and Transport Authority. We're quietly in the background of that project at the moment. But where we've seen the differences from design perspective, the project is being pushed to be moved quicker. Whereas comparing it with a European project, a Singapore project, Singapore was pushing ahead, and there's now a little bit of concern, a little bit of resistance, not wanting to be first. And that's the exciting difference in the Middle East. The Middle East is quite ambitious, wants to be first, and says, yes, let's do it.
Do you recognize, Nikhil, this story? I mean, you did some deals already in the region?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, look, I've been coming to the Middle East talking about flying cars for over 10 years now. I first came here in 2013 with Uber when we were starting the Uber Elevate division to speak with the Dubai Future Foundation. Back then, literally nobody in the country was talking about eVTOLs or electric air taxis. We were really the first to sort of help educate people within the governments of Dubai and Abu Dhabi. We got a chance to go to Doha, got a chance to go to the kingdom here. And at that time, it was craziness, right? It was pitching the dream. And you fast forward to today, there's very few people across the country that haven't, sort of heard about this. And it's really credit to the government and the leaders who have, to your point, they've aligned, right? Yeah. They've said, we're gonna make this happen. What does industry need? How can we move faster? And that's a reaction you don't get in many parts of the world. Back home, certainly, I think the conversations with municipalities is a lot tougher. They bring up a bunch of questions, which are valid questions, but they're harder to answer right now. And instead, you've got to start from a place of, yes, we're going to make it happen. What do you need? How can we make it happen faster? And that's what we really have seen here in the Middle East.
Thank you so much. I think the support is there. I have one question on the operational side, because it's quite warm here typically. Maybe Oliver, for you, for the Volo City, what would you see from an operational perspective being different of operating those aircraft here in the Middle East versus in the colder regions like where we are from?
Well, every operating location is different in itself, and we have to consider it. In our case, we have been looking at this location here, especially already rather soon. And I mean, it's also worth to mention that we are actively having here a joint venture here in Saudi Arabia, so a joint venture with the city of Neom to bring our aircrafts into operation in Neom, and the first aircraft is designed to be delivered still this year to Neom, so that with the early beginning 25 we can go into direct operations here. And yes, we have to deal with the conditions that we are having here. Maybe just to pick one example of how we are taking care of these elements. We spoke before about charging infrastructure, fast charging, blocking the stands. What we have decided for our initial product, the Volo City, is we are swapping the batteries. which means take the empty batteries out, get new batteries in, off the aircraft goes. So
Very
we don't
quickly.
have to wait for the charging, whether it's fast charging or slow charging. But the beauty out of this is we are charging these batteries in dedicated charging containers, standard 40-foot containers equipped as charging containers.
Yeah.
The batteries are kept at the optimum temperatures, optimum conditions, to allow to charge them smooth, get the maximum lifetime out of them, maximum number of cycles out of the batteries. And when they come to the aircraft, they are at the perfect temperature and we can go into operation. So high temperatures in the summertime don't hit us hard on that end as we go this way into the aircraft already and don't need to invest weight and energy into the air conditioning of the batteries on board of the aircraft. That's just one example how we are dealing with this and why it was so important for us that, how long is it ago now? More than 2 years now that we are interacting closely on this, and since we founded the joint venture, to really make sure that we get prepared for exactly this. Our Volodrone has been delivered. It's over there in the ballroom B of the hotel. You can watch it and you can see it, which is going now into the test operations here to prove that our assumptions have been correct, to match it to that climate conditions that we also need here.
Thank you. Maybe Dan, one of the last questions for you. When we look about we look at the airspace management side of things, and the Middle East is of course a busy airspace and getting more crowded. We see Saudi, Flynas, and other players here announcing massive growth. How would you think about airspace management when it comes to advanced air mobility in Saudi Arabia or the broader Middle East?
Yes, so airspace management, of course, this is going to be relatively easier on the front end, right? When there's a limited number of operations. Of course, making extensive use of defined air corridors. We're particularly excited about the future potential of that true on-demand air taxi use case. One of the things that's kind of interesting about the Middle East, certainly agree with my colleagues here, there's so much excitement and potential, right? We need strong advocates throughout. I'll give a shout out to Federico, is our liaison to the UAE. Our liaison to Jordan is out in the crowd here. One of the things that we think also in terms of infrastructure in the physical ground context, but also in airspace, Middle East has a number of projects. I'll cite Qiddiya. Oliver, you mentioned NEOM. We have an opportunity here to really showcase the potential of these operations in a way that's much more challenging in other parts of the world, right? We're not building whole cities from scratch in too many other countries anyway. And we're finding, of course, trying to layer on, trying to squeeze in precisely where the highest demand will be is a bit of a challenge. But in the Middle East, there's just so much potential.
Thank you very much. Before I want to take some questions from the crowd, so please, or if you have a question, think about it already. I want to dedicate the last question to you, team. Do you see Saudi Arabia as a leading country in the Middle East, and what is your personal view on this going forward when it comes to advanced air mobility?
Maybe you could say size matters. Yeah, back to the potential and the uniqueness regarding your question about the Middle East. Now, there is one thing truly related to the size and diversity, geographical diversity of this country. Obviously, anybody would see that it is not only urban or metropolitan mobility. Definitely, it will have to extend to regional.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure many of the OEMs and are looking into that. You could see that it's a very high potential, very high potential, especially when combined with economic feasibility, and money talks in that matter. So that's what I have to say about that. Yeah. So yes, it's just the size, and it's if we execute and monitor our advanced air mobility roadmap, okay, in cooperation, in collaboration with all stakeholders. Remember, that's the way we do it. We're transparent with the public, with everybody, and dynamic, adaptable, and that's a major thing that we have to have, adaptability. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from the crowd? I see there already a first question. So please dedicate your question to one of the panel members, and I'm sure they know how to answer.
So Kim Selander from Cooker Jar. I have a question in terms of industrialization and assembly plants here in Saudi. Do you foresee that a lot of the eVTOL industry, because it's a scale-up market, will actually move their assembly to Saudi and start manufacturing here in the country?
Is this a question to one of the OEMs or to
okay.
Gautam?
And then to the OEMs. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Regarding, in general, talking about civil aviation, assembly, manufacturing, it's no issue at all. And it goes as simple as that. It's the simple coordination between us, you could call us a state of manufacture, and the state of design. Okay? Definitely what you're talking about may be, or most probably, it's a product where we are not the state of design. Okay? So we just identify the state of design. Who is that state of design? And believe it or not, civil aviation authorities, we continuously talk. I mean, we are in continuous communication, by the way. So it's a coordination between us to be a prospect state of assembly, state of manufacture, and the state of design. There isn't much bureaucratic work to be done. But in general, there will be an international, for those of you familiar with the ICAO, an international agreement whereby the responsibilities of both states will be identified. It's for the sake of safety, I mean, safety of the user. So I hope I answered you, sir.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? There's a question here on the third row.
Hi guys, Joe Alicia, head of AAM for NEOM. A couple questions for the OEMs and the regulator as well. You know, going back 4 years when we started to develop these systems, one of the things that really hit home is a non-standardization. So you take electric, you take battery thermal management. We're in the Middle East, we have air conditioning. So I know some of you are working together, Archer and Beta, for example, and others. But what are you hearing from the other regulators? Are they looking to do a standardization similar to what I believe it was Europe did with the iPhone to make a USB-C?
Yeah.
What are you hearing about that?
So your question is how to drive standardization?
Yes, and what are you all hearing from all the different regulators?
Exactly. Do you want to?
Sure. I mean, I think interoperability is key, particularly when it comes to infrastructure. There's obviously a fixed amount of space where you can go build vertiports, and so you've got to be able to utilize those vertiports for multiple OEMs where you can. Then it sort of gets into charging. That's where we've partnered up with Beta to really push forward CCS as the charging standard. I think all of the major OEMs, except for one, have effectively adopted that. And we're proud of that, to have Gamma backing that, all of the industry backing it. And if you look, not just in the United States, but all over the world, they're beginning to install CCS chargers at those vertiports to make sure they work not only for Archer, not only for Beta, but for anybody who wants to take off and land there. That's a big one. I wish there was an opportunity for more standardization. I think we're at a nascent phase in the industry where people are competitive, but people are also guarded. And so I think as we sort of progress down the line, just like we've seen happen in EVs, just like we've seen happen in autonomous, I think other OEMs will be much more open to saying, okay, how can we go work together on some of these issues? Charging's been probably the most important. That's where it started. I think you mentioned, Dan, air traffic management. That's going to have to be a key one. Luckily, I think drones have set the precedent for us there, where with NextGen and UTM, they've sort of set the standard on how to collaborate and make sure that that's interoperable. And I think there'll be a bunch of other things as well. Operations, safety response, things like that. And I'm pretty confident that the industry players know each other well enough to be able to go align and say, hey, these problems are greater than any one player itself. It's for the good of the city and for the good of the industry.
And on multiple aspects, you already see the standardization happening. You're saying
Absolutely.
there's work to do on other areas, and we know where to find each other.
Yeah, and look,
you have-
we've learned a lot from our investor, United Airlines, right? I've had the pleasure of sitting in their safety briefings, of sitting in a bunch of their meetings at the operations center. A lot of what they do, particularly when it comes to safety, they do with other airlines. They meet regularly with their chief safety officers. They share tips, they share learnings, they share SMS reports. And that's really critical because those learnings go back to the American public. I think we have an opportunity to do the same with eVTOL as well.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe to
You wanna add to
complement
that?
on that,
Please,
and,
yeah.
there is still a lot of more that we can do. And I mean, looking also back when mentioned before that I'm also co-chair of the EuroK working group, which was inaugurated when EASA had defined its SC-VTOL. They said, we now need industry standards with it.
Yep.
So please go ahead and develop industry standards for the complete range of products. We're having now 9 subgroups running under that working group and dozens of standards also published in the meantime. The big challenge we had very from the beginning is everybody was still designing on the drafting board and nothing was really visible in public. And it's really difficult to talk with the industry about standardizing stuff.
Feels so
where
conceptual.
still intellectual property rights and so are not fully clarified. It's much, much easier when I remember back Part 23 rewrite, ASTM F44, when we kicked all this off, there it was easy. There are many general aviation aircrafts out. You can see them, you can watch them, everybody has this experience. You can come to find common grounds and standardize. We didn't have that luxury in the beginning, and there was a huge, huge hurdle to overcome. I remember on charging, that was one of the early ones we kicked off to do some charging standards, at least get the connector and the logic the same. Everybody was closing its book and not wanting to commit to what they are heading at. And that's a chicken and egg problem somehow in there. In the meantime, it's getting much better as more and more of the products start to get visible. So we're coming to more and more common grounds. But that's also a strong invite to everybody out in the industry, be it the regulators, which we have on these committees, be it the OEMs, be it the operators, be it the infrastructure providers. We also have a subgroup on vertiports, where we are developing standards. At the moment, we are working on a standard for ground handling equipment, firefighting on the vertiports in the EuroK working group. Please come in and join. And also, please help us to make sure that we are not duplicating the efforts.
Yeah.
There are different SDOs out. That is fair. That is all okay. But what we as industry also can control a little bit is by coordinating amongst each others. And that was also one of the discussions just last week with Gamma, where we said, yeah, if there is a new idea for a standard, let's briefly connect first to find out, is there some work already going on somewhere? And yes, if yes, then let's concentrate there.
Exactly.
If no, then let's see where we have the most critical mass of people available to really get this going. And in just such a high-paced industry, that is crucial to be efficient there.
Thank you. I think this answers your question.
I
I hope.
just add to that from the infrastructure side. We get given a brief. The first line says we want the vertiport to be aircraft agnostic. So we've got 4 questions that then go straight back saying, right, there's 4 interfaces with the aircraft. Which side of the aircraft is the passenger boarding from and embarking? Where is the plug? It doesn't matter that it's the same plug or not, but where on the aircraft is the plug? Where is the venting? And how does it connect to a tug or a jack pulley system? And that's one of the hardest challenges coming out of everyone has been in a draft phase. And that's now starting to change, which is good. We are getting some standardization there.
So not only convergence on the regulatory side, but also convergence on the interoperability and all those physical
Carefully, but
elements.
step by step. Yeah.
Let's see, we have a couple of minutes left, 2 in particular. Are there any final questions from the audience?
Hello, Yvonne Winter, Fly Now Aviation. Thank you. Thank you, Hatim, for addressing all these issues. And I feel that GACA has a very strategic and pragmatic way to see it. And you mentioned the use-based approach of EASA. And my question is, how do you see all these different vehicles operated in a confined airspace in the different categories, be it small drones, being fighter fighting drones, automatic flying passenger vehicles, and then the piloted eVTOLs. How do you envision that?
Thank you.
There you go, Hatim.
$1 billion question.
Thank you. Well, first, I'm not an air traffic controller. Yeah, but I'm sure all of you, or most of you, know that a definitive answer to this question is not out yet.
Yeah.
I mean, you could review all the used space literature and all the FAA and NASA work. The definitive answer and it has always been the question that I myself been asking all the times: how could those users coexist? And let's talk real here. I have an emergency medical helicopter flying at that lower airspace. At the same time, I have maybe tons of those delivery unmanned vehicles. At the same time, I have few air taxis. Okay, what is going on here? Now, yes, truly, the way we looked at it, I mean, what I personally looked at it, is that a couple of years back, you remember, we started in the US and, of course, in Europe with this remote ID. But hey, remote ID is only for the unmanned. But at least it's a good thing. But then you ask a question, well, how about those air taxis? They say, oh, no problem. They will have predetermined routes, which is fantastic. It's not going to be a showstopper. At a small scale, it's not going to be showstopper. I mean, I could have in Riyadh today some air taxi operations will predefined, airways and everything, and things will be just fine. Well, with some maybe safety risks of some rogue unmanned that we all know the end will be catastrophic, like God forbid that happens. But really, what we look for, and I'm sure that if you recall, the used space is defined as stages, and I think so far it's been always continuously modified. I know I don't speak on behalf of Europe, but it's basically stages whereby the final one is at 230 year 230, somehow coincides with Vision 230 of this country. But we're trying to do the same thing here. And we have to approach it very carefully. I know maybe some of the users, they complain. I don't blame them. They say, give me freedom to operate my unmanned delivery thing. I know they don't see the whole picture. We try to explain. And that's why I emphasize at the very beginning on the transparency, the full transparency of the authority with the public, with everybody, of what we are doing and why we do that. And I'm sorry, I didn't have an answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this wraps up our session here today. Give a big applause to the panelists.
Thank you.
And although 2024 is just started, I think we will see a lot more from all of those players. And there's an exciting time ahead of us for this sector. Thank you very much.
you.